Hi guys, my name is Ben Pettingill. I went on the Twin Stadium tour, and this is my final presentation for Construction Management 4473. So to start off here, I'm going to be talking about the Twin Stadium and kind of the background of how they got into sustainability. So to start off with some site information, we have the location, which is 1 Twins Way, Minneapolis. This stadium was built in 2010, and the square footage of the stadium is 1,127,632 square feet. It is an assembly building, otherwise known as a stadium, and the building name is Target Field, and the maximum capacity sits just under 40,000 fans. So the project team. So there are quite a couple companies that are involved in building the Target Field Stadium. And just to list off a few here. So the owner is the Minnesota Ballpark Authority. They're kind of the ones who put this in motion to get this stadium built for the Twins. The general contractor is Mortensen Construction. The architect is Populous, Hamill, Green, and Abrahamson. The engineer is Walter P. Moore. And for MEP, it was Metropolitan Mechanical Contractors, who did both mechanical and plumbing, and Gephardt Electric did the electric work. The stakeholders in this company are Hennepin County, the MBA, Target Corporation, and the Minnesota Department of Transportation. This project was also a construction manager at risk delivery method. So going into some green strategies here, after we toured Target Field and got to talk with the director of operations and some other people who were in charge of the construction of the Target Field, what we kind of realized were there were three main points here that Target Field kind of focused on. The first one was water. The biggest feature that they had here is that they have a rainwater collection system, which basically collects rainwater as it hits the facility and then is collected in the basement where it is purified and then can be used throughout the facility again. And it's mainly used to help clean the stadium seats. They also do very well in waste management. They have one of the highest diversion rates, which basically means that instead of all of their trash going into landfills and that, a majority of it is recycled, and they stand with one of the highest diversion rates of over 90%, which is very impressive. And then one of their other spots that they do very well in is energy. They reduce their energy by using energy efficient technology. Their biggest one lately was changing out the LED lights for both just the lights that light up the stadium, and then also for their scoreboards as well, the ones that allow you to see the players and that they zoom in with cameras. And just changing out those lights and making sure that they were LED to be more efficient, it reduced their energy usage by 55%. So LEED rating, kind of the big topic here with the sustainability of Target Field. So they had multiple LEED ratings throughout over a decade now. And so when Target Field was first built and they first got their evaluation, Target Field came in at a silver rating on the LEED scale. And after about a year, they got reevaluated and were still put in silver, but they had increased their point amount, a decent amount. In April 2017, a larger jump here, 6 years, they made it to the gold stage. And once again, 2 years later, in March 2019, they did another reevaluation where they were still in the gold position, but they had moved up again higher and had a higher point base. And then as of last year in August 2022, the Target Field became the first ballpark to be in the platinum level of LEED, which is the highest level that you can get. And the image here that I have in the bottom, it just kind of does a small breakdown of how Target Field got their platinum certification. So as you can see, There's energy, there's water, there's waste, there's transportation, and there's human experience, and there's also innovation as well. And between those point values, they add up to 81 total points. And as you can see on the left of that image, to reach a platinum certification, you have to have above 80 points, and they had just surpassed that. So now kind of focusing on the tour highlights, a group of us got to go into the stadium and actually talk, like I said, with the director of operations and some other managers who worked there or helped in the facility being built. And so there were quite a couple highlights here that I'd like to go over. So kind of starting off here with the living wall. If you look in these bottom photos, the green wall in the background here, that's the living wall. And it's a really impressive feature that they've added to Target Field. It is a plant wall. So the entire wall is made of plants. And the point of it is to just add kind of a natural nature feel to it almost. And it also helps with rainwater collection as well, because the plants need water. As rain comes in, the plants can absorb some of that water as well. And so adding this living wall aspect to Target Field also helped them achieve an additional point for innovation. And I just kind of put in parentheses that the innovation point that they got is IDC 1. Another cool aspect of the tour that we got to see was the 3D handmade model of Target Field. So as you can see in this photo on the right, this entire thing was handmade, and it shows a scale model of the finished product of Target Field. And so you can kind of see on the right side of the image going towards the bottom, there's the light rail here on one side. You have a massive parking lot here on one side as well. And then on the far kind of top of the picture and then running across the back of the stadium, there's two more streets. And so with this stadium, they gained multiple points for sustainable site section because they managed to fit this entire stadium in a very closed off space. And so they got both a point for site selection because they chose a place, a good spot where it would be good for public transportation. As we can see, there is a light rail here, so it uses less carbon emissions since people can just hop on the train instead of all taking individual cars. It's also within walking distance of many buildings as well, which makes it quite sustainable since that also reduces carbon emissions. They also got an additional point for parking capacity because one, there's this giant ramp right here that they have for parking. So it's very close to the stadium and it's actually connected to it. And then within a couple blocks of the stadium, there's another 2 or 3 parking ramps that are available. So it's not a far walk at all for people to get to the stadium. And because of that, they got another point in that site section since they chose a really good spot with plenty of parking and with great public transportation. So another cool thing that we got to see on the site tour was just some images of kind of the construction as it happened for Target Field. And this image that you see here, this yellow machine, it's kind of a vacuum lift. So it goes down on these concrete stands that they're putting in, and then they suction all the air out so that it creates a seal with the machine and the concrete, and they can lift up objects. And I just thought it was a really cool machine, but it's also great because usually you have to cut holes to add ropes to lift these concrete pieces up, and then you have to refill them, which can use additional material, and it also just requires extra time in the schedule for that concrete to reset. This machine right here, it reduces that time, and it also makes it a lot easier to just set it in since there's no need to worry about cables and that and making sure that you get them out of the way once you set it in place. And so, although I was not completely sure about it, I put down that it is possibly a point for innovation since it could possibly reduce some of the extra material needed to fill in those holes that would be there if they had used just a regular crane and ropes. And then the final aspect that I have here for our tour is the twins locker room. And I just thought this was a really cool thing to kind of see. In the bottom left here, this image, you can see the actual what the locker room looks like as of right now. So they have a bunch of couches and chairs and tables for players just to relax and kind of chit chat before games. And then each player has their own designated locker that they use for when they have home games. And so one of the other cool aspects of the locker room that I really enjoyed, which I show here in this bottom right photo, is they had the land of 10,000 rakes in kind of like a glass case where they had a bunch of different other artifacts. But it was very cool to see some of those artifacts, especially one that was recently used this last year. And yeah, it was a really cool experience. So kind of going now into the Twin Stadium, their process and procurement methods that they use. This first slide here is about the design and construction process. And so as we kind of went through the tour, one thing that stood out to me was that the both the owners, like the director of operations and other people who work on the actual stadium and kind of the contractors, they did a great job of working together before, during, and after construction. Obviously, it takes a lot of time to kind of think out how to fit such a massive stadium in a very small area. And I think they did a really good job of that. And then they continue to talk to try to improve their sustainability, making sure that everything works correctly. And so I think that the pros of their process was that they really had a solid team together who communicated well. And a potential con from the construction process is that because the owner and contractors work so close together, if there were any disputes over certain designs or certain materials used, it could lead to some problems. I don't believe there were any issues with this, but it is something that they could have run into. So material selection. So the pros of the material selection is that the director of operations for the Twins explained that they look for materials that were within a certain distance. And that's a great idea because it helps reduce carbon emissions for the entire project, which is something that LEED also focuses on. So there is potential points depending on how much carbon emissions they manage to reduce by trying to use local materials. And the materials were also chosen on availability. Since limestone is chosen, it's because it is in large quantities and it also comes from Minnesota and quarries in the north. And so based on the location factor, it's a great thing to pick the limestone. So some cons about it is that limestone can be very loud. And so this can affect the environment around wherever they collected that limestone. So animals may have to move due to loud noise. I would assume that it'd be constant noise. And then a problem with limestone as well is that it is able to kind of weather from both chemical and solutions. And so one thing that we have in winter, as you can see with all the snow in this image here, is that the salt that we use, it has a chemical to help melt the ice in the snow so that people can use the walkways. And so if any of that salt hits some of that lower limestone, it could potentially damage it. And over time, who knows what could happen with it? Maybe the limestone will crumble off or it'll just look bad. But either way, it's still kind of a con to with the limestone. So sourcing. The reason that they use local sourcing is because, as I mentioned, it helps with the LEED credit, both the MRC 5.1 and MRC 5.2, which is using local materials. And then the reason that they also local source is because Target Field's kind of central idea with the stadium was to focus on being Minnesota and to use materials that are from the local environment. So limestone, as I had mentioned, it is a material that is very available in Minnesota. And so that is kind of one of the bigger reasons that they used the limestone on the exterior of the facility. A con with sourcing is that it just can be difficult with materials being required for a project, especially like limestone on such a large scale since it was used on the outside of the stadium. It's possible that they can run into issues where they might not be able to get limestone at the specific date you're looking for, or depending on a different material, since you are trying to locally source, maybe you can't get that amount of material, and so they have to look elsewhere. And so there's definitely difficulties with locally sourcing. So I don't know which issues they ran into, but these are just some of them that we could have ran into. Now kind of going into the construction field practices here with the stadium, starting with construction waste. So a pro with construction waste is that more than 30% of installed materials were made with recycled materials, and that more than 70% of the construction waste was recycled, which is, again, as mentioned here, the MRC 2.1, which gives a facility a point for diverting 50% of waste from disposal. So instead of having waste going to landfills in that, they managed to recycle it or get rid of it in some way where it didn't have to just be sitting around or just disposed of. So they did receive a point for that. Some of the cons that the facility ran into is that a large portion of the soil on the site they chose, it was contaminated. And so it required the removal of soil and remediation of the soil so that it could be decontaminated. And since the removal of soil, that can be expensive. And if any soil was then needed to be refilled, that also can be a little bit of an expense as well that target field owners would have to take because of the lack of soil they had. Going into stormwater management now, some of the pros with stormwater management is that the warning track, which is the large strip that kind of goes around the field so that players know they're getting close to the wall, that has a stormwater collection system. So as rainwater kind of pours down straight onto the field, since it's an open stadium, that rainwater is collected. And then once again, it goes through the rainwater collection system and it can be reused. And then, as I had mentioned earlier, rainwater is collected just throughout the stadium. So as it comes off the roof, it's collected and brought down to the basement where it's purified and then used again. And this also gives the facility another different type point, the WEC 1.1, and that is water efficient landscaping. And then they also got WEC 3.2, which is 30% or more water reduction. And since they have this rainwater collection system, instead of using water from specific companies or something where they actually have to like buy water, they get it straight from the rainwater that they collect, which reduces the amount of water that they have to actually use from companies and that. So it's a huge reduction and it pays off for them since it helped with their lead. The cons with the management is that with the concrete and other materials that don't absorb water, it can lead to excessive water in other areas. So there is a lot of concrete and sidewalks that went in around the exterior of the facility. And because of that, and because concrete obviously can't absorb water, this runoff has to go somewhere. And so although they have drains in place, it is still water that has to be run off to somewhere else instead of going straight into the ground or being able to go somewhere nearby instead of straight into a sewage. For indoor environmental quality, the pros of their IEQ is that they used modern HVAC system to help keep fans cool during summer games. Obviously, baseball mainly takes place during the summer, and so a lot of the time, fans, although it is fun to sit outside and be in the sun, it can get pretty hot, especially in Minnesota too. We do have days where it can hit 90s and 100s, and so having fans in place that are very good and they are efficient is important, and making sure that they also don't use a lot of energy to while they're trying to cool fans down is important. They also have a lot of windows for quality views. There's a kind of a glass section in the stadium where people can sit as well, where you can see views, and then they just have windows throughout the facility so that it feels a little more open to allow sunlight in and stuff like that as well. So they also got LEED credits for thermal comfort, again, making sure that they keep fans cool during the games as best as they can. Low emitting materials, trying to make sure that the air quality stays good. So stuff like carpet, seating, their HVAC system, stuff like that, that helps, that doesn't emit a lot of debris, helps with getting credit. And then also having an IAQ plan, which is this kind of what are they doing with their indoor air quality and how do they make sure that they keep their air clean. So again, having these low emitting materials counts as part of that plan. Thermal comfort counts as part of that plan. And then having a modern HVAC system, like we mentioned, that also goes into part of the plan. And that's how they got a point for that as well. Some cons, and as I had mentioned, it can be very expensive for a large facility to keep fans cool while also trying to have an outdoor environment. Obviously, they want this place to be open and to allow as much natural light and fresh air in. But to do that means that their HVAC system does have to work harder when they're trying to keep fans cool and out of the heat. And so that can be a costly and big energy usage. Commissioning and turnover. So some pros is that they made sure that all machines were running correctly before occupation of facility. This is just a big thing for any building really, but again, with the facility as large as Target Field, it's important to make sure that all of these machines work correctly, especially since their project finished right before opening game. And so making sure that everything works. So as these excited fans come in to see the new facility for the first time, it's important that everything works so that they can have a smooth and efficient game and just to have a positive outlook on the new facility in that. And then they also got LEED credit for EAC3, which basically means that they do extra commissioning practices. So instead of just stopping after construction, they continue to report kind of how their machines are doing and other stuff like that. Also making sure they have like checkups to make sure that everything's working correctly and efficiently. And because of that, that gives them a point since they continue to do the commissioning process to make sure that everything's working as best as it can. And it helps stay sustainable for the facility. Some cons is that turnovers can take a long time because of making sure all these machines work in that. It can be a little tough with getting inspections. And then if requirements aren't met for LEED, it can cost a lot of extra money and time to fix those issues so that they can get, whether that's a gold standard, silver standard, or a platinum standard. It does require some fees in that, which can be costly, especially if you don't make that cut. So one of the final parts here going into the innovation section, just some strategies and techniques that we saw at Target's Field when we went there. So some of the ones that they used, again, was the rainwater collection system. This is probably one of the best strategies / techniques that they use just because it really does save a lot of water. The director of operations mentioned that they've saved about 20 million gallons of water, which is really impressive. So it really has made a difference for them. And I think it's one of their better strategies and techniques that they have used. Their waste management, as we mentioned, they do a great job of converting most of their waste to be recycled. They do that with their packaging, their cups, all that stuff that all the food and that you see at a lot of games, a lot of it is recyclable for the most part. And so they do a really good job of making sure that the waste that they produce is mainly for the most part recyclable. And then another really cool strategy is the waste to energy. And so, kind of in the bottom left corner here, it's the Hennepin Energy Recovery Center. That's what HERC is. And basically, what they do is the Twins will take some of their garbage that they have, some of the waste, and instead of disposing of it, they'll send it to HERC, and HERC will turn that waste. They will burn it. Well, first they'll sort through it to make sure that they can burn it, and then they'll burn that waste. It'll heat up water, which creates steam, and then that steam creates energy from generators that get turned. And so this energy that the Twins create from getting rid of their waste, they can then buy it back. And so it's a form of kind of sustainable energy. And so it's a very cool and interesting strategy to use some of that waste that they have and then use it to kind of make their own energy almost. So some things that they can consider though is they can enlarge the rainwater collection system. They have already talked about this. The director of operations had mentioned that he would like to expand it. It's still kind of a how can they do that? And then also just making sure they have the funds for doing that. So they're hoping that they can add it to the plumbing system. So instead of using water from a different place, they're hoping that if they can expand this rainwater collection system as a collect rain, instead of just using it to clean the facility, they can also use it for their toilets, for their washing hands at the sink, and other stuff like that as well. And then future waste collection, a very interesting topic that the director of operations talked about. So basically, one of the biggest things that the Twins struggle with is kind of picking up waste. As you can see up in the right-hand corner here, I have a photo of just kind of waste that you see from baseball stadiums. If you've ever been to a game, a lot of people will leave their garbage under their seat, and then it's up to faculty and staff members to clean it up. And that can be very timely since there's 40,000 people at this stadium. And it can also be expensive because of that as well, since usually you have to do this late at night or it has to be after the game at least. So it can be expensive. And so the director of operations would say that it would be a great idea if someone could figure out how to collect waste during the game. So although it doesn't interrupt people's attention from the game, but they can still get rid of waste so they don't have to have as many people staying late to clean up. And so they're just not wasting as much time focusing on cleaning up the stadium as well and using that water that they collect for something else, such as the plumbing in that. And so for anybody, really, it's a great idea to think of and maybe pursue to see what ways you can think of to collect this waste while during the games so that people aren't just throwing it around and then the facilities are left to do this after the game. Kind of the conclusion here, some key takeaways that I got from both the tour and just research that I did about Target Field is that the first one is there's many components. There's a lot of things to consider, especially on a project this large, something that's over 1 million square feet. To make a facility like this sustainable, it takes a lot of work. You can see in this photo here, all the LED lights at the very top of the stadium, the scoreboards, the lights above the scoreboards. That's a lot of energy that when they switched over from regular lights to LED lights, it saved them a lot of money. And so considering all the different factors, rainwater, parking, transportation. All those factors come into play when you're trying to make the facility as sustainable as possible. And so I think the team did a very good job of taking the time in advance to make sure what components they wanted to hit, and then just making sure that they stuck to that, and then figuring out ways that they could incorporate sustainability more and more as they continue throughout the construction process. My next takeaway is what is best. And so what I mean by this is that every company must find what works for them to be sustainable. As I mentioned kind of earlier, is that there's a lot of different categories on the LEED scorecard to be sustainable. And so although one for the twins here, their two things, energy and water, those were huge hits for them. And then they also did a great job at recycling a lot of their waste. And so that works for the twins, and maybe that doesn't work for other stadiums. Maybe they focus more on the water, or they focus more on reducing energy. And so thinking about what aspects are easiest or best to be done so that you can reduce your emissions or just be sustainable as possible, it's important to figure out and look at the scorecard and say, okay, we can definitely focus on this area, and then do your best to attack that section and really push for being as sustainable as possible. And then my third kind of takeaway is continue to improve. One of the things that all of the people that we met at the tour was that it's important to continue to improve in sustainability. The team that the Target Field has kind of worked with SMG for sustainability, they're constantly looking for new ways that they can improve. As I mentioned, they're trying to look into expanding their rainwater collection system. They have recently upgraded the cameras and the TVs in that so that they're a little more efficient, and that can help reduce energy as well. And so a big takeaway, especially with as more facilities try to follow these LEED credits in that, is making sure that they continuously try to improve. They don't just stay at the silver level, see what they can do to reach the gold level, or if they're in gold, try to move to the platinum, and so on. And even if you're in platinum, if like the twins, they're at 81 points, well, they're still looking for ways to become more and more sustainable. And I think that's a great thing to do. And so, yeah, for any company or facility that's looking to become sustainable, it's not just about reaching that certain point, it's about continuing to improve and become more and more sustainable. And then I just added this at the end for people to kind of look at, and then they can go back as they wish throughout the video. But this is the twins' first scorecard that they got. And so you can kind of see the breakdown of a scorecard. So sustainability site, water efficiency, energy and atmosphere, material resources, continued on this part, indoor environmental quality, and then innovation. And so as I was talking about in my takeaway, focusing on areas that you think you can do best, whether that's water efficiency or indoor environmental quality, seeing what areas work for you is important, and making sure that your facility is sustainable, but you're also not reaching too far and you're struggling to hit these sustainability points because it's not stuff that you can really do. So, and then finally, here are just kind of my references that I have as well. So thank you guys for your time, and I hope you enjoyed the video.